Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another video. We're continuing the chapter on decimals, and today's lesson is multiplying decimal numbers with whole numbers and decimal and other decimal numbers. I'm not going to do this as two separate lessons because the method I want to teach you in one go, and we'll do both examples in this short video. Okay, so let's have a look what the method is. Now, the method for multiplying decimal numbers with whole numbers and decimal numbers requires us to first of all count the total number of decimal places. Okay, I'm just trying to get my students to sit in a better position, so it's so much. That's it there. Play out. Right. Sorry about that. Okay, now the method. What we need to do is count. Can you count? Good. We need to count the total number of we need to count the total number of decimal points in the question. Okay, and let's look at our next. So the first thing is we need to count the total number of decimal points in the question. It'll all become apparent when we do our first example, but I'm just explaining to you the rule. That's what we do first. Then we need to make a statement. The statement is this: the total number of decimal points in the question is the same number of decimal places in the answer. So then you make a statement. So we say total number of is in the question is equal to in the answer. Okay, so whether you're doing multiplying decimal numbers with whole numbers, or you're doing with decimal numbers with decimal numbers, we need to go through a counting procedure at the beginning of the question to establish where our decimal point goes in our answer. So we need to start off in the right place first. Now, because of the nature of this work at the moment, I'm going to need to use the board again. After we've gone through this, I'm going to rub the board off. I'm going to start doing the questions, so you won't be able to have everything on the board at the same time. Because it'll be loaded as a video, you can always pause this part of the video, record the notes down, and then press play, and then you can go on to the next page, and the next page of work and things. So I'm going to go through that once more. Method number one: count the total number of decimal points. Okay, now this point here should actually be, if you realize the difference, places. Okay, that's a trick there. See whether you're awake. Points and places are two different things, and that normally gets confused by students. So that point there was put on purpose to see whether you catch the difference. Did you realize that points here and places here, they are two completely different things? A decimal point is a dot. Decimal places is the number of spaces afterwards where the numbers are resident. So remember, it's places, not points. We're counting how many places in the number, and same here. So you count the total number of places in the question, and then you make a statement. The total number of decimal places in the question will be the same in the answer. So let's move on from here and let's do some examples. Remember, we are counting places and not points, or points and places. Okay, well spotted if you spotted that deliberate error. Okay, let's move on to our first set of questions. We need to rub it down. Okay, that one's completely finished. Good. Right, okay. We need all the space we can muster. Inshallah, in the future videos we should be investing in ourselves in a smart board, so we'll cut out all the time spent cleaning the board and trying to get the smears off. Okay, right, let's move on. Alright, where's my black pen gone? There it is. Right, okay, I'm just going to check the position of the camera. Everything is okay, good. Example number 1. So we have 3. Okay, 3.6 times by 7. Now, rule number 1, the method that we just done on the previous part of the video. What's the method part 1? Count the total number of decimal places. Right, let's have a look what decimal place is. There's your decimal point. Remember, we're not counting decimal points, we're counting decimal places. This here is your first decimal place. So the decimal place is always on the right hand side of the number. Now if you look at this number here, does this number here 7 have any decimal points first of all? No. Does it have any decimal places? No. It's just a whole number, and that's just a unit. Decimal points will normally be here, and decimal places will normally be here, the next numbers. But this particular number is a whole number, and it doesn't have them. Okay? So, in this question here, altogether, how many decimal places do we have altogether? We have 1. Excellent. So let's make our statement. Remember, step 2 is making a statement. So we can say 1 decimal place in my question is worth 1 decimal place in my answer. Okay. Right. So let's write out the question now properly. Right. Now, some teachers, when they teach this part of the mathematics syllabus, decimal number by whole number, they say, just copy the decimal point down. I don't want to go down that road, because I don't want to teach you 2 rules for one type of question. When you're multiplying decimals, regardless of whether it's whole number or a decimal number, it's important that we use one technique, because traditionally addition, subtraction and division, you just line up the decimal points, but with multiplication you don't. It looks like you're going to line them up here, but you'll see in further questions how decimal points do not line up at all. So I don't want to teach you 2 techniques for one type of mathematics. So if you learn this technique of counting and making statement, it'll work whether you do a whole number question or a decimal question, decimal by decimal. So let's, without any further delay, we got 1 decimal place in the question, we're going to have 1 in the answer. That's our statement, yes? When you do your question for homework, please set it out like this. I want to see the question set out like this first. count it, make a statement, or rewrite the question in the way that you normally do the question, like in columns, put the decimal point in. Okay, you probably think, hang on a second, what? They line up. They line up in this question. They won't line up in other questions. Okay? So let's carry on. So we do the question like a traditional times table question. So 6 times by 7 will give us, okay, 3 times by 7 will give us 21. Then we add the 4. Important to keep everything in columns. Yes, you can see my number 2 is moving this way. That's in the hundreds columns. Units, tens, pardon me. You have tenths, units, and then you have tenths, units, and tens. So make sure everything's in the right column. That's the end of our first example, where we multiply a decimal number by a whole number. And again, to reiterate, we are not counting decimal points and places. We are only counting decimal places. Okay, we're not lining up decimal points. They line up if according to the rule. So this rule is saying here, 1 decimal place, which is that one, and that's done. Okay, that's a nice straightforward question. Let's move on to question number 2. Okay, let's see if we've got enough room over here on the board to carry on straight across there. Alright, that's okay. Example number 2. Now you see what I mean by we don't line up decimal points. This part of mathematics, multiplying decimal numbers, is all about counting the number of decimal places. Places, remember that word. Decimal places, decimal places, we're counting decimal places. So, okay, let's look at this first question. Method part 1 was count the number of decimal places in the question. So if you look over here, 2.5, there's the point. This is 1 decimal place. Okay, there's the next number. There's the decimal point. There's another. That's 1 decimal place. So altogether in this question, how many decimal places do I have altogether? 2. Well done. So let's make our statement. Part 2 of the rule says, once you've counted the number of decimal places, we make a statement. So our statement is going to be, let's make sure that we all the boards in. So I'm going to make my statement here. So 2 decimal places in my question will give us 2 decimal places in my answer. Okay, I'm going to write down places here, just so you don't get confused later on. It is places and not points. Okay, places. Remember, places. Right, let's do the question now. See the beauty of the question, how it comes through. So we write the question like this. We count physically. We make the total. We make a statement. 2 decimal places in the question, 2 in the answer. So we already know at the beginning of the question how many decimal places we're going to have in the answer, so we don't get ourselves confused by putting them in the wrong place or not knowing where to put them. So we have 2.5 and we multiply that by 3.7. Now as you can see, Amina, how many numbers do we have here? 2. So will it be short multiplication or long multiplication? Long. Thank you. Okay. Right. Let's set the question out. We've got to put 2 decimal places in the answer. So I'm going to start from here. 1, 2. I'm going to put my decimal points right at the beginning so there's no confusion. So that's my 2 decimal places in the answer. So we've counted, we've made a statement, I've put it in already in advance. So there's no messing about in the question getting lost. Now, another thing as well, please do not put decimal points here or here. Okay, no more decimal points in the question. These are 2 decimal points in the question and that's the one for the answer. Finish. You do the rest of the question like a normal long multiplication question. Okay? Good. So when we do long multiplication, what we do in the first line, so we do 2, 5 times by, so we do everything on the top multiplied by the first digit on the first line. That's the technique, have you remember it? Or everything here multiplied by the 7. Okay, we pretend that the 3 doesn't exist, it's not there anymore. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my magnetic board rubber and cover it. That 3 is not there for the moment. So 2.5 times by 7, I'm actually going to take the point out from there. Because remember, we're not going to deal with the points as such now. We multiply them out as normal digits. The decimal points have been taken in consideration according to our rule, counting, making statements, putting them in. The decimal points have now been dealt with in the correct way. Do the question like a just normal question now. 5 times by 7. So 5 times by 7 will give us a total of 5 times by 7 will give you 35. Now 2 times by 7 will give you 14. 14 add the 3 will give you 17. Keep the numbers please in the right columns. So there's one column here, another column, move the 1 across another column. Don't squeeze the numbers up. Squeeze the 1 onto the 7 and the 7 onto the 5. Keep everything lined up. Okay? Most of your work's done in square books, isn't it? Yeah? Squares. So you should keep one number in one box. Now, I can take the board marker off the 3 and put it onto the 7. So now we're going to multiply the 2, 5 by the 3. Because we multiply them by, so we do 2, 5 by the 3. So now we multiply everything on the top by the second digit. So you multiply by the second digit on the second line. That's what we're doing here. Multiplying this by the second digit on the second line. But we must put a 0 first. You can put a 0 there, you can color it in, you can shade it in, you can put a flower in there, a teddy bear in there, you put whatever you like in there, but you're not allowed to put a digit there, a number that you will, so you can't stop the question there. So that 0 in a sense pushing your answer across to the correct position for the second digit. So now we're going to deal with 5 times by 3 in the traditional way. We've got 2 numbers times by that number now. So 5 times by 3 will give you 15. Okay, so that 0, that shaded in box will push the 5 across into the correct column for our long multiplication. So 5 times by 3 is 15, maybe one over here. Then you've got 2 times by 3 left over, that'll give you, and then add the 1 will give you 7, thank you. Right. What do we do now? So we multiply by each digit individually, we push the second number across by 1 digit. Now what do? We add them. So we do 5. Okay, for the sake of argument, I'm going to change this back into 0. So we do 5 add 0 is 5. 7 add 5 is 12. The decimal point's already in the right place. You can put the decimal point in now as well, but we didn't right at the beginning to get everything out of the way, done and dusted. So 7 add 5 will give you 12. And then you got 1 add 7, that will give you 8. You got 1 on the bottom, that will give you 9. Okay? So 2.5 times by 3.7 will give you an answer of 9.25. Okay, that's done. You can move the board marker from there. That number is nearly 4. That's 2.5 times by roughly by a number that's 4. So that gives you an answer like that. Okay, 9.25. Now, this is the one point I wanted to point out to you here. These decimal points line up where? Line up here then. So according to our line-up technique or line-up idea, concept, the decimal points will just end up there. But where does that decimal point end up? So are we lining the decimal points? No. We're not using a line-up technique. In the previous question, it looks like we lined them up, but we didn't line them up. We followed the method. The method lined them up by itself. So now, if you look at this question, it's a good example of why we use one technique for whole numbers and one technique for decimal numbers. Count the number of decimal places, and you will get the question right each time. It is simple, this work to do. Only difficult if you don't know the right technique. This is the right technique. So let's swap off these red lines now, so you don't add any confusion to the video. So that would be where they would go if you line them up. We are not lining them up, we are counting the decimal places. 1, 2, 1, 2. Decimal point goes there, question done. So in a sense, that's a question with the whole numbers, that's a question with decimal numbers, and the rest is just all more questions like this and more questions like that. What I'm going to do now, that's the end of our video for today. That's the end of how we multiply decimal numbers, and that should do the job for you. Now I'm going to try to get to focus in front of the camera is the actual question sheet. So let's see if we can get that done, and then you can pause it, print it out and do the questions, and you can check the answers using a calculator. Please ask your parents' permission first before you use a calculator, because they think you might be keen. Right. Okay, right, I'm looking behind the camera, and here are the questions. Exercise 10 questions. I'm just going to move the sheet slowly up. When you're doing this on your YouTube video, please press print screen to press pause first on the video. Press pause on the video first. Press print screen and drop the text into Paint program and print it out. Hope you can see those numbers clearly. I'm bringing it a bit more closer. Bring it up again. Okay, folks. Okay, that's the end of today's session. Inshallah, hopefully we'll see you in the next session, when we'll be looking at how we divide decimal numbers by whole numbers and how we divide decimal numbers by decimal numbers. Until then, Assalamu alaikum.